I didn't cry at my father's funeral. I remember standing beside the casket, listening to the rehearsed sympathy in people's voices, watching polished shoes shift uncomfortably on cemetery gravel. They called it a tragic accident, a mechanical failure on a quiet highway outside Munich. But grief did not overwhelm me that day. Suspicion did. My name is Elena Voss, and my father did not die because of faulty engineering. He died because he refused to approve a lie. My father, Markus Voss, had spent his life believing that systems exist to protect people. As a senior structural engineer for Helixion Group, a celebrated European renewable energy corporation expanding into the American market, he oversaw safety compliance for multiple facilities across Eastern Europe. To the public, Helixion represented progress, clean energy, environmental responsibility, ethical innovation. But several months before his death, my father discovered internal safety reports that had been deliberately altered. Stress tolerances were downgraded. Structural vulnerabilities were reclassified as manageable risk. Digital signatures were applied to documents he never approved. When he confronted his superiors, he was advised, politely, to reconsider the larger economic implications of transparency. He called me one night, his voice steady but distant. I was living in Boston at the time, working as a data analyst for the same corporation's US expansion team. Elena, he said carefully, if something happens to me, don't trust the official version. 3 weeks later, his car exploded. The investigation was swift and shallow. Access to the vehicle's digital logs was deemed irretrievable. Traffic cameras along the route malfunctioned during a 20-minute window. The case was closed within days. When I attempted to access internal engineering records through my position in Boston, my credentials were revoked before the end of the workday. My role was restructured, my email deactivated, my name quietly removed from active directories. They did not threaten me, they erased me. That was when I understood that power does not argue, it edits. I did not protest publicly. I did not accuse anyone. I allowed the world to assume I was grieving and unstable and incapable of objectivity. Then I disappeared on my own terms. I resigned formally, left the United States, and began rebuilding my life across Europe under consulting contracts that kept me close to the regulatory frameworks multinational corporations depend upon. If Helixion had killed my father to preserve a narrative, then I would dedicate myself to understanding how narratives are protected and how they collapse. Revenge, if it is impulsive, fails. I was not interested in fury. I was interested in structure. Over the next 3 years, I studied corporate compliance law, digital forensics, and cross-border regulatory enforcement mechanisms within the European Union. I worked in Zurich, then Amsterdam, then Vienna, never long enough to attract attention, always long enough to learn. I observed how subsidiaries fragment accountability and how liability dissolves when responsibility is distributed across jurisdictions. Helixion continued to grow. They received sustainability awards. They secured American federal partnerships. Their CEO delivered keynote speeches about environmental ethics in Brussels and New York. And each time I watched him speak, I remembered my father's final phone call. My first real breakthrough came from a neglected server belonging to a minor Polish subsidiary. Through a temporary consulting engagement, I gained indirect access to archived engineering audits. buried inside outdated encryption protocols. I found two versions of the same structural integrity report. The original assessment described severe turbine foundation instability with projected catastrophic risk within 5 years. The revised version, submitted to regulators, labeled the issue as statistically insignificant. Both versions carried executive level authorization codes, including the CEO's. The moment I opened that file, I expected to feel rage. Instead, I felt confirmation. My father had not miscalculated. He had been eliminated. I began collecting methodically internal emails discussing acceptable casualty ratios, financial forecasts that treated potential injury settlements as operational expenses, legal strategies outlining containment plans in the event of exposure. The language was clinical, almost elegant. That was what disturbed me most. They had not perceived themselves as villains. They had perceived themselves as pragmatic. There were nights I questioned what I was becoming. I was living under partial aliases, communicating through encrypted channels, trusting no one fully. Isolation hardens you in ways you do not immediately recognize. I wondered whether my father would approve of the path I had chosen. He believed in institutions. I was preparing to dismantle one. But then I would reread the original safety report. I would see his digital timestamp before it was overridden, and my hesitation would settle into resolve. When I finally assembled enough documentation to establish a pattern of deliberate falsification across multiple countries, Poland, Spain, Romania, and beyond, I did not leak everything at once. I designed a sequence. Investigative journalists in New York, Berlin, and London received encrypted packages with verification keys that activated in stages. Regulatory bodies received anonymous submissions supported by cross-referenced documentation. I did not accuse. I presented evidence. Before the first article was published, I sent a single anonymous message to the CEO's private executive channel. You mistook silence for surrender. The first expose went live at 6:12 YUAM, Eastern Time. By midday, financial analysts were questioning Helixion's valuation stability. By evening, European regulatory authorities announced coordinated inquiries. The corporation responded predictably. Denial, claims of data manipulation, promises of internal review. But documents possess a stubborn quality. Once verified, they resist erasure. Additional releases followed in controlled intervals. Each one expanded the scope, concealed structural failures, suppressed whistleblower complaints, internal cost-benefit analyses, calculating injury compensation against infrastructure overhaul expenses. Public confidence deteriorated. Share prices declined sharply. Board members began resigning under the language of personal reasons. During a global sustainability summit in Geneva, the CEO was confronted live on stage with authenticated internal correspondence bearing his authorization code. I watched the broadcast alone from a rented apartment overlooking a grey coastline. When asked directly whether he had approved the suppression of critical safety data, he paused. It was brief, barely perceptible to anyone not searching for it, but in that hesitation, the illusion fractured. Within weeks, multinational investigations formalized into criminal proceedings. Assets were frozen pending inquiry. Arrest warrants were issued under charges of fraud, regulatory obstruction, and endangerment. There were no dramatic chases, no cinematic confrontations, just procedure. Accountability unfolding with deliberate precision, a journalist eventually traced the encrypted chain back to me. She contacted me through a secure intermediary and asked whether I wished to go public as the source who initiated the collapse. I considered the question longer than I expected. For years, I imagined that justice would feel triumphant. Instead, it felt quiet, heavy, final. I declined the interview. This was never about recognition. It was about correction. My father believed that systems, when functioning properly, protect people. He died because the system was manipulated to protect profit. Instead, I did not destroy Helixion out of vengeance alone. I exposed it because truth, once documented, demands to be seen. I sometimes wonder who I might have become if that highway in Munich had remained uneventful. Perhaps I would still believe in corporate mission statements and polished keynote speeches. Instead, I learned something far less comforting. Institutions do not fail dramatically. They fail gradually, hidden beneath language that makes harm sound reasonable. They assumed time would erase what they had done. They assumed I would move on, that grief would dull into forgetfulness. They were wrong. I remembered everything.